I'm Michelle Dowd. I'm a professor of journalism and creative writing, and I advise student publications here at Chaffey College.
And I'm Mark Ikeda. I'm Emeritus Professor of Biology at San Bernardino Valley College.
So Mark, this whole conversation that's taking place behind us, it feels like a conversation.
It does.
In terms of, the artist's work. Do you feel that there's any difference in the way that you see or observe or think about ants, since you know so much about them, but do you see anything differently, or is it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the nice thing about this whole presentation, the series of 3D films, was that seeing it from somebody else's perspective, to see what the artist picks up on, to see her humor and what I think she made films about, that's just been fascinating. And even though the ants aren't aware of it, and even though the ants are kind of maybe reluctant participants in the whole thing,
Yeah,
it's been interesting to see how the filmmaker would engage people in uniting people with the ants.
What do you see when you look at this?
So the thing that strikes me is that we're seeing aspects of colonial behavior in these insects, and they're unique because they're social insects, and so that's only true of a very small proportion of insects like this. And they're just fascinating because, unlike what most people think, there's nobody in control. There's no queen dictating commands. There's no king that all the ants are obeying. So how about yourself? I mean, when you look at this film,
well, I naturally anthropomorphize, and it looks like a battle scene, one not unlike we would think of with gang warfare, or I wouldn't say a formal army, but just sort of, it feels tribal. It feels like there's violence and aggression going on. And honestly, when I see this, I think of this as being metaphorically any idea where there's a dominant trope, and then you have the resistance against that. About the unwilling participation of all sorts of not just insects, but just creatures on this planet, that they are not willing participants in our particular dramas, and yet we do impose our drama upon the planet.
Absolutely.
Which is a much bigger, I guess,
Absolutely.
Conversation.
And I think that might be a conversation that comes directly from viewing films like this. So much of what Catherine Chalmers seems to be doing is focusing on human activities and focusing on the human perspective and using ants in a very artificial way of doing that, just to point out how meaningless that whole enterprise is to the ants, and how really unfair to the ants having a story pushed upon them is. So this whole process has been fascinating for me, just the appreciation of art and artists and what they do and the challenges that they face. So, yeah.
Well, we push our story across the globe as Americans,
Yeah.
and certainly as humans. And it reminded me, so my mother passed away last year, and she had scientific, mostly self-taught training, but in zoology and biology. And she would get very frustrated with me because she said, "Stop using your imagination. Science is not about imagination." We actually had active conversations about that. And I wish she was here to see this film, because I would say, "Mom, no, seriously, this is that's a thing, right? Like, we can bring our imaginations to science." But I wonder when you think about science, because to me, it feels like scientists are storytellers.
Yes. So to your mother, I would say that imagination is priority number one for any scientist.
That's what I used to
say. Absolutely. Because scientists have to have an imagination to think about what might be happening. Otherwise, there is no food for thought, there's no creative aspects of what to explore, there's nothing. So even though it appears that science is kind of avoiding imagination, that is really the foundation for all science. And I wish that weren't. I wish science wasn't portrayed in that fashion, but it is. I think that's all the result of the scientific process in trying to wash out imagination, but that's not how most scientists try to behave. So.
I'm very happy to hear you say that and to explain that so articulately. I was thinking about that relationship then with scientists who, you can correct me if I get this wrong, but who are basically creating a hypothesis or like creating, you know, a potential story, and that our artist, Chalmers, is also setting up a scene for a potential story. And then allowing the story to play out, probably as she predicted it, but perhaps with variance.
Yes.
And that feels very scientific as well.
Yes, absolutely. That reminds me of a singer-songwriter, Jackson Browne, and how he always wondered when people in Italy heard his music, how they perceived it, what they thought of it, because you know, that not being their native language, artists seem to have that really expansive way of thinking that a story told by me could be interpreted in all these different ways that I never saw when I was creating the story. I think that's just fascinating, inherent in both art and science. So I've just gotten a huge appreciation for what you and other artists do in their work. It's just been mind-blowing for me. And I love to have my mind blown, so.
So if they're led by a sense of smell, do they have any sense of color?
That's a really interesting question. That's one of the features that seems to be so intriguing about this entire videotape.
Yes.
This is a great example of that. It isn't clear to me that ants experience color in any form at all.
And yet visually it appears as if they do.
Exactly. That's what's so wonderful and delightful about this. I mean, they're obviously engaged with these leaves and actively cutting them up and in transporting them away. We see all this art being displayed, but for the ants, everything is olfaction. And so whatever chemical compounds they're picking up on the surface of these leaves are what make them either attractive or unattractive, things like that.
In literature, it used to be taught a lot, I mean it's still there, but something called reader response theory, and it is specifically about stories that it is the dialogue between the reader, the person who brings their experience to the text and the text itself that creates the magic. It really doesn't matter what the author intended or the artist intended, the filmmaker intended. Right. That whatever they intended, is not brought to life and does not really become anything until you have the dance between the viewer and the reader.
That's absolutely wonderful. That is breathtaking. So that sort of interaction in humans, that kind of interaction is being displayed in social insects as well.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. That is breathtaking because it's a piece of wisdom that we can take into observations of social insects. And that, yeah. So this has just been fascinating.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with me. This has been delightful.
You're certainly welcome.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.